The Energy Information Administration estimates that 2019 will be a very strong year for US wind capacity additions, and the month of December will be by far the strongest. And the reason is the phase out of the production tax credit for wind power, which provides the financial incentive for every kilowatt hour produced during the first 10 years of a wind project. And developers are now making sure to start the formal process for the projects by the end of this year to claim eligibility for the production tax credit. And what I found very interesting in the statistic by the Energy Information Administration was that a very similar situation was happening in 2012, which is a current record holder year for wind capacity additions. And that also was a phase out year. The production tax credit then retroactively was reactivated later on. But there was also a run on projects to just get the financial incentive for the wind projects. And so, contrary to the narrative that wind is often the competitive source of power already, this just shows how dependent wind projects are on government incentives. So after 2012, in 2013, wind capacity additions totally collapsed, like a tiny fraction of the 2012 additions. And then, it restarted when the incentive was renewed again, and then hovered around. And now 2019 will again be shooting up just to get into the taxpayer money. And so this production tax credit collapse doesn't even take into account something like a renewable energy portfolio standard, which many states have established, which actually mandates a certain share of renewables by a certain date. And, this is a non-monetary mandate, but still these capacity additions depend crucially on the per kilowatt hour subsidy, right? So whenever someone proclaims that, this coal power plant or nuclear power plant cannot compete with cheap renewables because they have become so cheap, I have to roll my eyes, because I know this is not a market decision. This is not, people looking for the best offer by power sources. This is, totally government controlled and incentivized. And without the incentives, the demand for these things usually collapses.
Yeah, I'm seeing in your notes, it's really funny to see, because you see 2012, it goes 2010 is at about 5. I mean, this is in gigawatts, but then 2011 is at 7, and 2012 is at about 13 and a half, and then 2013 is at 1.
Yeah.
So you just see that you have 7. Think about the math here. You have 7 in 2011, and then 2012 and 2013 add up to about 14, which divided by 2 is 7. So it's like those average out the same, but you could say in 2012, oh my gosh, we're really on an exponential path. I mean, imagine where it'll be in 2013.
Yeah.
And then, now we see the reality of what it'll be in 2013. This just, by the way, thinking of this term exponential that has become a term of abuse reminds me of an article I mentioned earlier by Mark Mills about the new energy economy and exercise in magical thinking. That's a really good paper from the Manhattan Institute. And one issue he goes into in some depth is just the difference between the different, digital computing revolution and then, prospective energy revolutions. And one point I take from it is that he points out that the computing revolution, a huge part of it was figuring out how to do more computing with less energy. Because if they hadn't figured that out, then it would just take huge amounts of energy. And he points out that it's not that there's the same there's unfortunately not the same kind of opportunity to figure out how to heat water just 10 times more efficiently or move a vehicle 10 times as efficiently, and thus what we really need is, you're not going to have the same kind of dynamic with an energy technology, at least not with any of the existing ones. Maybe you can get some other thing, or maybe some form of nuclear that ultimately becomes super cheap. But ultimately, we have to generate. We need to generate lots of energy. Actually, one point this reminds me of also that he goes into is a point about efficiency, because he has a really interesting discussion of efficiency, and how he discusses how generally the more efficient a technology gets in terms of using energy, the more people adopt it, and then the more energy gets used by that kind of technology. And I found the most fascinating example to be computers, because he talks about how computers use way more energy overall than they used to, and yet computers have become millions of times more energy efficient. So that's an example where something becomes millions of times more energy efficient, and yet it still uses more energy over time, because when it uses a lot less energy, then you can have it do all sorts of interesting things. And he makes the point that policymakers think of energy efficiency in terms of human beings will use less, whereas human beings think of energy efficiency in terms of the proper way. This will allow me to get more out of life. So definitely recommend that paper.
Well, I wanted to say something about that general point, Alex, because one of the things that I find really striking in how we talk about the role that like wind and solar will play is that it's like always, I think this goes to the energy efficiency point, right? We're going to continue doing the same things, and we'll be able to use less energy to do them. And then all of the projections about wind and solar, it's all based on like replacing our current energy usage, versus like we want to be able to use significantly more energy, which we can do the more affordable it is and the more efficient we are. And like that should be the goal. And that's what, if you're going to have an evolving energy sphere with better sources of energy, they should be able to support dramatically more energy use, not rely on us to stagnate.
Yeah, and it's a giveaway that it's not at all plausible that they'll surpass the current ones, and thus it's just they're just all claiming, oh well, they're somehow magically going to do exactly the same. I mean, you can imagine if there was someone who's like claiming a different kind of computer chip, and then all they could ever claim were kind of far-fetched claims that, oh well, we can match silicon. You'd think, oh, why are you doing this? And is it really going to be as good as silicon, or is it just going to be not nearly as good? Because there are reasons to use silicon, and that's really, really effective. And so usually you don't come up with a new thing that's exactly the same goodness as the old thing. And so, but one a related point here is just that energy as we know it is fossil fuel energy. So we think of cheap, plentiful, reliable energy, but our very concept of cheap, plentiful, reliable energy is based on what the fossil fuel industry is able to produce, and has actually figured out how to produce. And it's that's a certain level of efficiency of production, and then a certain level of versatility in terms of just different forms of energy for different purposes. And it's obviously a really hard thing to do. It's a real achievement. That's why one big reason why others haven't done it, and thus there's not a reason to suspect, oh well, something else could do it exactly as well. Like today's level is some magical baseline, and then it's, oh well, of course something else can do it this well. Like usually things are very different in their ability to accomplish goals. So the idea of a perfect substitute for fossil fuels is far-fetched. It's actually more plausible that, oh well, we could find something, at least for some purpose, that's way better at certain things. But solar and wind do not appear to be it, except for people with this exponential nonsense. But that's part of the reason why I recommend what Mark Mills talks about.